Good afternoon. Thank you all for attending today. I appreciate that you took the time out of your day to come to this presentation and appreciate your interest in local Revolutionary War history. There may be some elected officials here today, and we acknowledge your presence. We did receive an email from the governor's office, and he sends his regrets about not being able to attend. Thank you, Sarah, Mary Ellen, and all the library staff for all the work that you do to present public programs. We established this collaborative and supportive relationship just prior to the pandemic. And I'm so grateful that it continues because it complements both the library and the Historical Society. Thank you to the Board of Trustees of the Historical Society for your support in this project. This presentation is part of the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States, the semi-quincentennial. Our goal today is to add and fill in the historical narrative of the role that the Plainfield area and residents played in the Revolutionary War. Rich and I will present some of our findings in the search for the lost fort of the Plainfields. When you think about the Revolutionary War, what comes to mind? Philadelphia, Boston, Fort Ticonderoga, Valley Forge. Does anyone ever think it happened here? The militia and Continental soldiers traversed the Plainfield land. They marched along the Quibbletown Road, Old York Road, now West Front Street. Forage wars and numerous skirmishes occurred in the area, and the Battle of Short Hills occurred in the area of Woodland Avenue at the Plainfield Country Club and Hillside Cemetery area. The soldiers could have walked or rode over the land right where we are sitting today. In order to reach back to the Revolutionary War era, you have to understand the geography of the Watchung Mountains and the activities of the militia to understand the scope, significance, and importance of the lost fort Militia Post. Minimal clues were left by the Vermeule family, a map and some recollection and speeches from the 1920s. A.V. Van Doren Honeyman, who was an attorney and formerly corresponding secretary in the New Jersey Historical Society, wrote a book about the history of Union County in 1923. These 100-year-old sources were used when I first started my search. I found some clues about the fort. The library has a copy of these sources, and a link is included in one of the speeches in the handout that you can find it online. I feel honored that we are picking up where these men left off. It is like a road rally. I think they left the clues, hoping and knowing that people in the future would have the technical abilities to finish what they started. Over the years, I've read many history books, listened to presentations, attended symposiums and events where people talked about the Revolutionary War in the area of the Watchung Mountains. I have learned about the Middlebrook encampments. There's some people here that do the Middlebrook and Symposium. The artillery camp at Pluckerman, which is in Bedminster, where the Hills Development is now located. Jockey Hollow, Ford Mansion, part of Morristown National Historical Park, the Battle of Connecticut Farms, and the Battle of Springfield. But there was always a huge void in those stories. Cornelius C. Vermeule said it best in 1923 when he wrote, "The local history of Plainfield has been inadequately recorded," and I agree with him. Not much is said about what occurred at the foot of the Watchung Mountains in the valley 400 feet below, on the plains between Middlebrook to the west and the Hobart Gap to the east. What protected the mountain passes? Why were there no battles in those mountains? What was here and what impacted our area play in the stories of Middlebrook, Morristown, Pluckerman, Connecticut Farms, and Springfield? Why is our area seldom spoken about when there are Revolutionary War discussions? In the 2007 National Park Service report to Congress on Revolutionary War and War of 1812 sites, our area had one mention that was incorrect. It listed Ash Swamp as being in Plainfield. This report is used as a basis for grant funding. If the local historical societies are not asked, then there is no way that someone from outside of the area could possibly know all the local name changes since Revolutionary War times. They say politics is local, well, history is local too. Rich and I will attempt to answer the question of why. Hopefully the work that is being done will begin to add to the historical record in time for the 250th, and other historians and the general public will take notice. This is the story of a journey and the challenge of stepping back into time and history and retracing footsteps to discover the boundaries of the lost fort of the Plainfields. During the Revolutionary War and quasi-war, Plainfield had a significant militia post, encampment, cantonment, camp lot, or fort, which was strategically placed in the area. It went by many names, and for today's purposes, I will just simply use the word fort. There is a small group who make up the fort team. I want to thank Rich, who stepped up and has been supporting and helping me. I also want to thank the team who have spent hours searching to find the lost fort of the Plainfields. We are all volunteers and none of us are getting paid for this. Rich has amazing skills when it comes to maps, historical names, and the internet library. Many times he finds an obscure reference and I search out the primary sources. Following his history clues, Rich's talents of mapping, overlays, and video flyovers that create the visuals needed to understand the context of the fort and encampment in relationship with the local geography and topography are invaluable. Rich has created a flyover animation video that will show you the size of the fort and will be at the end of his presentation. It's pretty amazing. I do not claim to be an expert in the Revolutionary War history. I research and make timelines to create patterns and put pieces of the puzzle together. My focus is the Plainfield area. Each time we find a piece, it either confirms or slightly alters our perspective or interpretations. Mining historical data takes time and is like piecing together a big jigsaw puzzle. Over 40 years ago, I can't believe I'm that old, I learned that there was a forgotten Revolutionary War fort and encampment right under my feet, a militia post. I began the quest, challenge, and journey. No one in my neighborhood knew this, or if they did, they never talked about it. I went to Jefferson School and they never told us about this. And it was right near Jefferson School. The story was lost and forgotten in history until I found the Vermeule speeches and Honeyman's book. Hundreds of maps, letters, documents, deeds, newspaper, books, pension records, online sources have been looked at with trips to Morristown, Newark, Elizabeth, Princeton, Trenton, Washington Crossing, New Jersey, Valley Forge, National Archives, Washington, D.C., New York City, and the Old David Library in Pennsylvania. Some trips I did alone, other trips I did with friends, some who are in the audience today, many who are here today, and other trips were done with Rich and members of the fort team. I am certain that there is more to discover. This presentation is a compilation of some of the materials that have been found. Every day, more comes to light. Because of the 250th, more and more archives are being put online, so we have to keep going back and searching different resources to see if something else has showed up. The journey and the story are not complete. The exact known location is getting close as the 14 trades information. Rich's historical map skills and his placement on current maps have been an enormous help in narrowing down the location. The team, the 14 includes John Daniel, who lives in Texas. He's a descendant of the Vermeule family, who owned the land where the fort and encampment was located. Rich Palmatier from Scotch Plains, myself, NJIT students, and NJIT Professor Potts. Consultation with Dr. Veit from Monmouth University and Ryan Radis, a graduate of Monmouth University. Rich and I gave this presentation in April to the North Jersey American Revolutionary Roundtable Symposium. And since that time, even more data has become available on the internet. We have added our new finds to this presentation, and you'll be the first ones to see it. How it all began. This is the Iter Vermeule House in North Plainfield. Some of you may recognize it. It's located on Myrtle Avenue in North Plainfield. It is a private residence and has been for over 247 years. Iter was the second son of Cornelius Vermeule, who owned the land where the Militia Post Lost Fort was located. Iter was a lieutenant of the Essex Militia. In the 1980s, there was an effort in my neighborhood to overdevelop it, just like what we're going through today in some areas. My parents and neighbors fought at least 2 other development efforts, and then it was my generation's turn to fight another. At the same time, other areas in Plainfield had residents who were developing historic districts. Although the homes in my neighborhood were built at the turn of the 20th century, there was not the same enthusiasm as other Plainfield historic neighborhoods. A bit disappointing, and I kept thinking, too bad nothing important happened in my neighborhood. The historic district started house tours. There was one tour that went beyond the boundaries of Plainfield and included the Ida Vermeule's house. I was intrigued because this house always interested me. It's set back off the road near a pond and was distinct from the other neighboring homes and not far from my house. The homeowner was and still is so proud of the history of her home. I remember being in the backyard of her house, which was really the former front of the house. It overlooks a former mill pond. That's the mill pond off of West End Avenue. She was telling me about the boxwood near the entranceway that were from England. Then she told me about the Militia Post and fort. I was in disbelief, and that began my 40-year search to find nuggets of history. My brother and I and the kids in the neighborhood used to go in Greenbrook Park, and we had no idea that that's part of where the fort was located. So I went to the local county park and I found a plaque under the bushes, which you will see in a later slide. I read history books about Plainfield, Scotch Plains, North Plainfield. I went to Essex County to look up deeds. I took a computer course in mapping in CAD, and I flunked math, so that was amazing that I even did that. Life got in the way, and every once in a while, I would take up the search again. Then in October 2019, I met John Daniel, a Vermeule descendant. Friends called me up to say he was giving a presentation in North Plainfield. We became history friends. During the pandemic, we would talk almost every day, but the pandemic slowed down the momentum. We decided to put together a group of local historians, and Rich was the first person I called because he knew all about the Battle of Short Hills, Watchung Reservation, and the local mills. I had seen his amazing work before in some of the up at the Watchung Reservation during 4 centuries in a weekend. We also needed an expert in surveying. I searched New Jersey universities and decided to contact NJIT. 3 years ago, I sent a general email to Professor Potts, Associate Professor, School of Applied Engineering and Technology at NJIT. I couldn't believe that he responded. I was so grateful. I felt like I hit the lottery, and here we are today. Why is what happened?
That's fine. Take off the side.
You can hit that X, no? Okay. I just want to go to the next one.
Don't go to the.
Okay, yeah, I went to the, okay, thank you. And here we are today. Why is it so difficult to locate? Simple. Plainfield did not exist. Plainfield was part of Essex County until Union County was formed in 1857. During the Revolutionary War, it was part of the township of Westfield. It was the western end of Essex County and basically wilderness, sparsely settled, and even today, most people who live in Plainfield have no idea about this neighborhood. Early Plainfield maps stop just east of the area of West End Avenue and go no further. Always a disappointment when looking at maps. There were various names for the Militia Post that can be found in local histories. General Samuel Holden Parsons said it best, quote, place which has no name. It's also known as the Plainfields of the Westfields of Elizabethtown, at Vermeule's, the owner of the land, at Quibbletown, because the Quibbletown Gap is Rock Avenue, at Scotch Plains, because of the Stagehouse Inn, which was a stage stop, the Blue Hills Militia Post, meaning that the Watchung Mountains used to have a blue haze, and then sometimes it was known as the State Militia Post at Vermeule's. Thanks to Rich, he found a citation, and then I was able to find this letter. This was a recent find. General Samuel Holden Parsons' letter to his wife on June 22nd, 1777, describes the place which has no name. I have no way to tell you where I am by describing the place which has no name. Our camp is about 2 miles advanced in front of the mountain where the army is posted. Road to Quibbletown, about 1.5 miles north of that town, about 2.5 miles southwest of Samtown, about 3 miles west of Brownstown, about 10 miles northwest of Spangtown, about 8 miles northeast of Brunswick, 6 miles from Middlebrook, and 1 mile from the stream called Brownbrook eastward, but further distant from the village of the same name. If you can find me by this description, I will be rejoiced to hear from you. His letter goes on to say, which isn't included here, but his letter goes on to say to his wife, where their next movement will be is uncertain. Perhaps if I live, I may see you sooner than I expected than when I left home. About 1,000 of my brigades have joined us. More are expected every hour. Colonel Butler and Major Still are at Morristown. I expect they will soon have orders to join their brigades. Every necessary of life is exceedingly dear. Salt is from $10 to $20 per bushel, and other things very extravagant. I am in very comfortable circumstances myself, though not very well. This letter indicates that General Parsons felt threatened about the upcoming battle of the Short Hills. He gave his wife the best description of his location in case he did not make it. In doing so, he provided a firsthand account as to why no one knew the name, the place which has no name, implying that he could not find it on a map either. And this was from the Life and Letters of Samuel Holden Parsons, which was in a book that was written in 1905. I understand from that book that a lot of his papers were burned, but one of his family members was able to provide us with this letter. This next map that Rich did shows the distances from the Parson letters. You have the Army Road, which is a Quibbletown Road. Then you have Quibbletown, which is in Piscataway. Then you have Samtown, which is towards South Plainfield. Then you have Browntown, which is up in the Bonnie Burn. Rich can even describe it better than me. Bonnie.
Blue Star Shopping Center.
Yeah, Blue Star Shopping. Then you have Spangtown. Go ahead, Rich.
Right.
What? Rawway. And then you have Brunswick, which is New Brunswick. Then you have Boundbrook. And then you have the brook that's Boundbrook. And then you have the place which has no name. So his description was fairly accurate once Rich worked on this map for us. And you can see the ridges of the Watchung Mountains just up above. This is a general order from George Washington dated June 24th, 1777. And in it, it says, in case of alarm, the army is to be drawn up in 2 lines on the northern side of the brook, meaning the Green Brook. Brigadier General Parsons' brigade on the left of the second line to be joined by General Varnum. So it does mention General Parsons in this general order. After the Battle of Short Hills, Washington thought that General Howe would move toward Peekskill, so Washington ordered General Parsons and General Varnum's brigades toward Peekskill. This is a map done by Cornelius Vermeule. The battlegrounds of the Revolution, Essex and Middlesex and Somerset County, 1878 and 1888. This map gives an overview of the area and gives a strategic location of the militia post at the base of the Watchung Mountains, protecting the gaps between Middlebrook and Scotch Plains, routes to Morristown and Basking Ridge. Cornelius Clarkson Vermeule was the great-grandson of Captain Cornelius Vermeule and the great-great-grandson of Cornelius Vermeule, whose land the fort was on. The Vermeule family should be commended because without their 2 generations of documentation and books, no one would have any idea about the militia post. They left enough clues for people like the fort team to discover. This map also shows that, and if I can find my pointer, and I don't think I'm going to be able, it also shows that the British got within a half mile of the Drake House. The British never made it to the Watchung Mountains like they had planned. And it's a little bit closer up, and you can see they were turned back here and they were turned back here. And the fort was here. They protected the mill. They protected to Morristown and also the other gaps in the mountains. And it also protected all the mills that were along the Green Brook. Um, you can see the fort. Goes back to the map, so you get a general area. You can see the Watchung Mountains here. This is the original map by Captain Cornelius Vermeule from 1778. This map appeared in the Courier News in 1938 and has appeared in other local history books. G.S. Dunford was a local historian. He wrote many columns for the Courier News and was a trustee of the Historical Society of Plainfield. The original map is missing. I contacted the great granddaughter of the woman who was listed in the article as the owner of the map, but unfortunately she knew nothing about it. We're still trying to find the original map, but at least we have this from the Courier News. These slides are have been enhanced by Rich. The Vermeule family owned the land where the fort and encampment were located in Plainfield. They lived on a plantation at the corner of Greenbrook Road and Clinton Avenue in North Plainfield. This map copy is a treasure because it's the earliest map that gives the location of the encampment. You can see the names of all the landowners who surrounded the encampment. The Coverts, the Marcellus, Cadmus, they were all relatives of Cornelius Vermeule. In one of the New Jersey Historical Society preceding articles, I was able to calculate that there were approximately 58 members of the various families who surrounded the encampment who served in the Revolutionary War. This shows 1,200 acres that Cornelius owned and which basically surrounded the encampment fort. Please notice the 3 mills that are located on this map. Recently, I found tax rateable scanned documents on the New Jersey State Library and New Jersey State Archives website. And in 1781, Nathaniel Drake was listed as having 2 stills, and his son was listed as having a mill. The Vermeules and the Covert family owned mills also. The Covert mill was near Rock Avenue along the Greenbrook in Plainfield. Mills and stills were important in the Revolutionary War because men were paid in spirits, and sawmills were needed to plane wood, and grist mills were needed to grind grain into flour. The Continental Congress set up daily rations of the Continental Army soldiers at 1 pound of bread, half a pound of beef, half a pound of pork. If pork wasn't available, then they got 1/4 pound of beef, 1 pint of milk, 1 quart of spruce or malt beer, 1 gill, 4 ounces of peas, beans, or another vegetable. The soldiers were also supposed to receive 6 ounces of butter and half a pint of vinegar per week. Throughout the war, Washington's army struggled with supply shortages. Finding the tax rateable from 1781 is the first indication that Nathaniel Drake was not just a farmer, but had a business of making spirits. In this 1781 tax rateable document, Nathaniel Drake had 2 of only 8 stills in Essex County, or 1/4 of the stills. This is a significant find. This map appears to show that the Militia Post also protected the mills. Many Revolutionary War battles in other places were fought near mills. The British never got close to these mills because of the fort. One can only imagine how important these mills were to the war effort. Some of the roads, he highlighted some of the roads. The Quibbletown Road curved around. It's no longer curved around, and that's now it goes straight, and that's would be West Front Street. It goes right through, and also the railroad tracks would go through. You'll see it here. You can see it here, superimposed in the area. He owned he had extensive land owning. And this big map, you can see the Drake House over here in the mills. Okay. It's coming up. It's a flyover type thing. It takes time. Rich overlaid the 1778 map on a map of today so you can get a better visual. Before I leave this map, the landowners surrounding the encampment were farmers. They were all neighbors and interdependent of each other. And in the New Jersey Historical Society proceedings articles, Cornelius describes them as friends, neighbors, and relatives. You could see on this one, you could see where the bluff is. So the brook is down here. And the fort, we think, was probably up on the bluff. Let's see, it's still gonna play. My research indicates that not all the landowners owned enslaved people. Some were Quakers. Locating the names of the enslaved people is difficult because the map includes two counties, Essex and Somerset. The manumission records, if they exist, are not indexed. They are tedious to read, and sometimes the cursive writing is illegible. Some of the landowners died without wills. So far, I've been able to identify 24 enslaved people. Not all of them are identified by name. They contributed to the cause as well as the spouses of the men who fought. The enslaved people and the women had to keep the farms running, and they had to defend the encampment when the men were away. All of these people took in their neighbors to the south from South Plainfield, Piscataway, when the British came through and pillaged the area. The locals fled to the north toward the Watchung Mountains. It is not known if the Drakes or the Vermeules took people in. No damaged claim records have been found, and I have found no indication that any of these landowners were loyalists. Let me go to the next slide. There's two homes identified on the Cornelius Vermeule map from 1778. As I said, the Vermeules lived on a plantation at the corner of Greenbrook Road and Clinton Avenue, North Plainfield. The original house, this is not the original house, but that's the house that's there now, is no longer standing. In its place is the Vermeule Brunson Mansion. The original house was George Washington's headquarters. It was such a busy place that when George Washington needed a quieter place, he went toward the east and held his council of war for the Battle of Short Hills on June 25th, 1777 at the Drake House, which it would have looked like then when George Washington came to visit. This is what it looks like today with the additions that were put on in 1860 and 1880. The Drakes were patriots, and three of the Nathaniel Drake's sons served in the local militia, as well as Caesar, who was freed in 1769 by the will of Nathaniel Drake's father, Isaac. Caesar was an African-American teamster and was 78 years old when he served in the militia. Caesar will have a sign on the New Jersey Black Heritage Trail because the society nominated Caesar and it was accepted by the New Jersey Historical Commission. We're just waiting word when they can erect the sign. Many historic sites brag that George Washington slept here. At the Drake House, we say he took a nap because one of the Nathaniel Drake's granddaughters, Phoebe, related that she saw him taking a nap on a cot. Now that I found that Nathaniel Drake had stills, perhaps George Washington came for a drink. While Washington was in this area, he spent time with the locals at the Vermeules and Drakes. He knew the Fitzrandolph and Vale family. He gathered intelligence from many of the local families. In addition to the Ida Vermeule house, which I previously spoke about, North Plainfield has two other Vermeule family residences still in existence. One on Greenbrook Road toward Rock Avenue, it sits almost on the road, and one Captain Cornelius Vermeule house on Mountain View Terrace, the home of the man who drew the map. There is one Cadmus house still in existence on a hill at Greenbrook Road and Crossing Place up on West End Avenue. As you go up West End and you make a right, you'll see the house up on the hill. All four are private residents, which has survived over 200 years. The Vermeule family and Cadmus family were related. Another Vermeule home is located in Greenbrook on Rock Avenue near Greenbrook Road. Somebody from the Greenbrook Historical Society is here. Sorry. How did I do that? Did that. Sorry. Okay. Another Vermeule home is located on Greenbrook Road on Rock Avenue near on Rock Avenue near Greenbrook Road, Dr. John Vermeule's house. Dr. John was the grandson of Cornelius Vermeule. There's a 1799 date on a beam in his house, and I will mention it again later in this talk. This house is run by the Greenbrook Historical Society and worth the visit. Neither the Vermeules or the Drakes put in claims for what they offered during the Revolutionary War, and no known diaries exist. The Vermeule family still has a footprint in this area, even though most people do not know all the sacrifices that the family gave. That the family gave to the Revolutionary War cause. They are seldom written about now. The same is true of the Drakes. Both families are often left out of Revolutionary War books. I've had to lobby for their inclusion in some recent books, and I'm grateful to the authors who have listened to me. This slide shows the proceedings of the New Jersey Historical Society from 1922. And at the bottom, it describes the encampment as being 95 acres and a fort 200 yards square. In this 1923 address, which is on your handout that you can see online on the library website, Cornelius C. Vermeule reports that family members saw remnants of the fort in existence later than 1825. This is also the document that says the local history of Plainfield has been inadequately recorded. This is the Greenbrook Park Monument, overgrown when I went to look for it in the 1980s and 90s. And as it looks today. Unfortunately, the bronze plaque was stolen in 2010, and I was able to get Crime Stoppers to offer a reward. I must thank Rich for replacing the plaque. Area residents take the time to plant flowers and a flag, which helps to encourage the county park system to keep the area in neater condition. And this is what is said on the plaque. It's the site of the Blue Hills Fort and Camp. This marker is erected in the memory of the brave Revolutionary soldiers from the vicinity who garrisoned this fort, harassing and repulsing the invading army for 7 months during the darkest period of the war. From this outpost, General George Washington on June 26, 1777, finally turned back the whole British Army, compelling them to evacuate the state. It was erected by the Continental Chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1924. These are some of the battles of the men that were stationed at the fort: the Battle of Spangtown, Battle of Quibbletown, the Battle of Short Hills. Men returned to the fort after the Battle of Monmouth. Maxwell troops camped here 6 weeks in November and December of 1779. They were here during the Battle of Springfield. They passed on their way to Yorktown and Battle of Yorktown. Lucerne's troops camped here. The garrison fluctuated between 1,000 and 2,000 men, and troops stationed here included the Militia Morris, Sussex County, the 1st Essex Regiment, the 1st Somerset, Hunterdon, and the 1st Middlesex Regiment. This is John S. Covert pension record from October 15th, 1832. His brother, this is a testimony by John, his brother Luke, who served in the militia. Men were allowed to get pensions at some point, but they had to have witnesses give testimony. John Covert says his father's barn and house was a quartermaster's store. General Washington's headquarters was at his uncle Cornelius Vermeule, a mile from his father's house. I remember the Covert barn at the time. It was located at Rock Avenue. At the time that I was there, I had no idea the name of it or the significance of it. It was the area Plainfield Humane Society at one time. I was inside it once because my cat was in quarantine. At that time, I was awestruck by the size and wooden boards and loft space. I could still see myself inside the barn. It was torn down in the 1960s and 70s to make way for the Little League ball fields that are on Rock Avenue now. Up on the hill is the abandoned Covert family cemetery. No one had any idea what role that barn played during the Revolutionary War. And it's significant that it was also the quartermaster store. So they would have had supplies for the troops in that particular barn. This is another pension record we found. This is part of Daniel Swayze's pension record. He was a private in the Morris County Militia under Colonel Jacob Drake, who was distantly related to Nathaniel Drake, and that might be why Washington chose the Drake House, because people would trade back information back and forth. In this, it said sometime in January or early February, and was stationed at the Vermeuleans. It's hard to read, but that's how they would spell Vermeule's name. The next one is the Journal of Sergeant Major George Grant, which described to Scotch Plains and Encampment Maxwell's troops 6 weeks in November, December of 1799, remained there in tents for 6 weeks during the most severe and cold weather. Major Grant served the 1st Battalion, Somerset County Militia, New Jersey Militia during the Revolutionary War. This area was also used again in the march to Yorktown, with Luzarne's Legion camped here in 1781. It is not known when the Militia Post ceased operations. Cornelius Vermeule never submitted a claim, nor did Nathaniel Drake, which also adds to the lack of historical information and mystery. However, the impact of this encampment and fort was significant, because when the quasi-war occurred, the undeclared naval war in France in 1798 to 1800, this area was remembered by George Washington and Alexander Hamilton when the United States purchased the land from Cornelius and Ida Vermeule, who were the elder Cornelius's sons, because the elder Cornelius had died by 1784, so his sons got the land. And this is a copy of the Essex County deed book from page 211, where Cornelius Vermeule, the son of the other Cornelius, sold the land to the United States of America. On October 2nd, 1799, the government paid $2,200 for 43 acres. You can see my handwritten notes to my visit to Essex County Land Records, the days before cell phones, tablets, and scanners. This was not the friendliest of places to go to, and I was lucky to find these. The other images are from Family Search, which has some deeds online, and I have to thank a Drake descendant from the state of Washington, who I helped get her into the DAR. She helped me figure out how to find land record deeds on Family Search. This is Ida Vermeule's deed, the next page, 214, where he sold on October 2nd, 1799, 45 acres for $2,250. There are some discrepancies in the amount of acreage, but the deeds indicate 88 acres were sold. Some books say there was 95 acres, but the deeds indicate 88 acres in total. The next slide is an amazing find. Rich knows this gentleman, Mr. Ruffley, and he's an independent researcher. He was down in the Princeton Library, the Firestone Library, and he sent Rich this. He only sent it because he saw the Vermeule name. I have never met the man, but this is like an amazing find, because this is the receipt from the United States to Ida Vermeule for 45 acres of land in the amount of $2,250, which equals approximately $56,000 today. It's incredible that he was able to find this and that we could put this together. This is an image of Washington Rock and Greenbrook, and the image is courtesy of the Plainfield Public Library Local History Department. The encampment and fort would have been seen from Washington Rock and would be in the distance along the tree lines. Rich did an enhanced image, so the fort would have been up in here. As an aside, Edward Fitzrandolph, who is buried in Plainfield at the Friends Meeting House, was the man who took George Washington up to Washington Rock. Former President Barack Obama is related to Edward Fitzrandolph through his mother's Dunham genealogical line. And President Barack Obama knows that. This slide shows acts of Congress at the first session of the 7th Congress of the United States, 1802, which sold the land back to the Vermeule family. I found this at Rutgers. So this proves that the fort actually existed because it is an act of Congress. What is so interesting about this militia post in the Greenbrook Park area is that both Washington and Hamilton remembered this militia post when the United States was contemplating war with France, the quasi-war in 1798 and 1801. This was a limited naval war against French privateers who were seizing U.S. ships in the Caribbean. War was never formally declared. Washington was brought out of retirement by President John Adams because Adams needed Washington's military experience. Hamilton was appointed Major General by Adams. Washington and Hamilton needed a supply fort, so the United States purchased the acres from the Vermeule family. Hamilton and Washington remembered that there was fresh water and grass available for the horses, and wood was also available for the construction of huts. This slide shows that that there was an act of Congress that sold the land back to the Vermeule family, and they actually paid more for the land to get it back than what they were paid by the United States government. It also shows an ad for the Swift Shore Line, which was the stage line between Philadelphia and New York City. And if you look closely, it shows that there was a stop for the Union Camp, which was the encampment. I hope I can, it's right there. That's what the fort was called at the time, was Union Camp. That's why it's so hard to find this fort encampment. Both Hamilton and Abigail Adams visited the troops at the encampment. Abigail Adams arrived by stage. Her daughter, Nabby Adams, was married to the commander in the encampment, William Stephen Smith. Hamilton was in the area for weeks or more, but it's not known where he stayed. His tent did not arrive in time, and he stayed at a local home, but the location was not found. So we can't say that he stayed at the Drake House or the Ida Vermeule House or the other Cornelius Vermeule House. There just are no records. More about this can be found on the Plainfield Public Library's YouTube channel. John Daniel, the Vermeule descendant, did a talk about the Blue Hills Militia Post, and Ryan Radis did a talk about Hamilton at the Union Camp, and that's on your handout. They're very good programs about the actual fort. This is a page from the Seeley Diary that's in Morristown, the Morristown National Historic Park Library. It shows that Hamilton visited in October 8th, 1799 on one of his visits. Then this is from the Farmers Museum or Lay Preacher's Gazette from Walpole, New Hampshire. Washington died on December 14th, 1799. The country went into mourning. This article says that there was a funeral parade on December 26th, 1799 at the Union Camp and the encampment, and in the other side over here, it said that there were 4,000 to 5,000 people who attended. These people had to come from all over because the 1832 map that the Historical Society has and the library has on their website indicates that in 1832, the population of Plainfield was only 740. So to get 4,000 to 5,000 people to come, they came from all over to go to this fort. And we have found documentation that they had 7 pastors came and they had a ceremony, and supposedly there was a monument put at this fort, but we have not located where that monument is. There are lost and forgotten burial grounds in the vicinity of the encampment and fort, as indicated in these newspaper articles. I was told when I was younger, a lot younger, about the Native American, about a Native American, a neighbor told me that a Native American was found, skeleton was found. The last house on Myrtle Avenue in going into Greenbrook Park, they were digging it out underneath the house to put a garage, and they found bones. They found a skeleton. It took me years to confirm her story, but I was finally able to find this article in the Courier News, October 4th, 1956, that talked about finding the Native American skeleton. I have reached out to the state police lab, but they have no record of what happened to the skeleton, which is quite sad. I also found an article about Farmer Halstead Compton, who Compton Avenue is named after. His house still exists on West Front Street. He described finding bones when he plowed his farm. This was at the end of Myrtle Avenue where the skeleton was found, and he said that there were 30 to 40 soldiers buried on a mound. I found this out just before COVID, and I managed to find Seeley's diary at Morristown Historical Park and go there before everything shut down. Knowing 30 to 40 or even just one soldier are buried somewhere in my neighborhood with no recognition it was just devastating. Years ago, a former neighbor told me stories about seeing a dark soldier figure by an oak tree in his backyard that borders Greenbrook Park. He would go out of his house, and at night, sometimes he would see a figure standing by the oak tree. So I went up back. So when I was looking through Seeley's diary, I went there specifically to find evidence that soldiers were actually buried. And here you can see that there was one, John Style, a soldier, which is the second that had died in our died. So he was buried somewhere in the area. We also found documentation that this fort also had this Union camp had Plainfield's first hospital. This is from the Hartford Courant from April 7th, 1800. Timothy Taylor was a lieutenant colonel commanding the 13th Regiment. He was one of the regiments that were stationed at the fort. The 11th, 12th, and 13th were stationed at this fort during the Quasi-War. And he was ordering his men back, make sure that they knew that they needed a report to the camp. This is from June 7th, 1800, from the Seeley Diary, and it talks about First Lady Abigail Adams's visit on June 7th. Dull this morning, I went over Webster's place and is good. We took breakfast and came to the camp, and the troops paraded for the President Lady. That's what they called her. So there is first primary source documentation about this fort and encampment. So the next steps, there's more to be discovered. And since I put this together for the symposium, we have found, thanks to Rich, online, an orderly book from Massachusetts from 1778, where the general says that the general, meaning George Washington, will be here at 3 tomorrow. And the tents will be struck and loaded, and immediately the troops under arms. So we found more evidence that Washington had come back. Then this is the 1781 tax rateable record that I just found like 2 weeks ago because I was preparing for this talk. So thank you everybody for making me find this. And it's hard to see, but Nathaniel Drake owned 2 stills.
Wow.
And when I went through all the pages, as I said, there were only 8 stills in all of Essex County. So he owned 1/4 of the stills. Then this also in the 1781 tax record, you can see that Cornelius Vermeule and Ida Vermeule owned one owned 162 acres of land in Plainfield and one owned 128. And this indicates that they were taxed on the fort property, even when they didn't. So they were taxed, even though they did what they did for United States, they still were taxed. And then recently on July 27th, this is part of the 14 with Dr. Potts and his students from NJIT. They're working on finding the exact location. We have done measurements with high-tech GPS surveying equipment using, I said we, but they, using 26 satellites, including the Galileo, which is Italian. They've also used the Russian satellites, the Chinese satellites. It's way over my pay grade. So when they talk, I just listen and try to absorb whatever I can. I have transcribed hundreds of deeds from 1799, or I've researched hundreds of deeds and transcribed some of them, trying to make a direct provenance back. It's difficult because the Vermeule and Cadmus families own so much land that tracing the portions directly back is an enormous history mystery puzzle. From what I last heard, they're within 30 feet of the exact 4 points. Of finding the fort. They wanted, they're engineers, like my dad was an engineer, you have to be accurate. Everything has to match. I mentioned the Dr. John Vermeule house, which was built in 1799, according to the date on a beam in the house. Construction of the house stopped during the time that the fort was being built because we believed that they needed the wood to build the huts, which you'll see in a flyover that Rich did when he talks. We have consulted with members of the Historical Society, Greenbrook Historical Society. And like I said, the huts for the 11th, 12th, and 13th regiments who were stationed at the camp. We in that house, we think we found a couple of old boards, which may come from the old fort. So we're working with Greenbrook to try to figure out if the boards that we saw actually could have been from the fort. The last slide is this was dedicated just last month, a couple weeks ago. August 16th is the Al McWilliams Bike Trail. Former Mayor Al McWilliams had me prepare a piece about the fort and encampment for him. I'm not sure if it was used to promote this trail or not, but this trail is supposed to go 7 miles along the Greenbrook. And the site of the fort and encampment would be along this trail as an added trail benefit, as well as the former location of the Covert Farm and family burial plot. There is mystery in the ground where we live. Land has a mystery and it has history. One other thing I want to mention and then hand it off to Rich is Crossroads for the American Revolution has a revolutionnj.org website, which is tells you all about the American Revolution. RevNJ, REVNJ.org is the 250th site. The two students, Ryan and James Bronco from NJIT and Ryan from Monmouth, did receive a $300 scholarship from the Mark Mappin Student Research Scholarships from the New Jersey Studies Academic Alliance. That's the only money so far that's been received. None of us, Rich or I or John Daniel, have received any money, but I suggested to these students that they apply for a scholarship to help them in the future, and they were able to get the scholarship. So now I hand it off to Rich.
Will be thanks to the library, for Sarah for having us here, and amazing Nancy for doing all the work and giving me credit. Actually, what I do is online, I type in, show me the stuff that nobody knows about. And then it just all comes right up. So I don't have to really search. But I am Rich Palmatier, and I also work for the Union County Office of Cultural and Heritage Affairs. And I just want to do a little plug. You may understand that we have the 4 Centuries in a Weekend coming up fairly soon. You'll see these signs around, they're up front of all the historic societies. And it's a yearly event, which I participated in up till COVID, and it's coming up in a few weeks. I don't remember exactly when. Oh, there. Okay. And you'll see these signs out in front of the buildings. You go in. It's free. It's all the historic society. We've got like 40 people coming in this year. Don't forget to come on October 19th and 20th. But meanwhile, while Nancy's doing all the work, I've been having fun looking at old stuff because I'm a researcher and a person interested in old mills. And I've been doing things. Up until the COVID, I did a yearly event down in the Votech, some of you may know, and I'm looking at one of the guys, about the Battle of the Short Hills. And I show people the old maps and stuff that happened over there in Ash Swamp and in our area. I mean, history happened here. It didn't happen in Boston. It happened here. And that's what I show people, but I mostly do it for kids and have stuff for kids to do when they come in, including hand puppets. And for several years, I've managed to show people things on the maps, and I've made some toys. That's a replica cannon, and I learned that children want to pick up a cannon. It makes them happy to run around with a big cannon. So well, it's true. I didn't bring it with me today, but it's made out of fiberglass. What I also do is I try and see if I can put people to sleep by showing them old maps. And one of the main ones that I do is, this is a radio topographical map of our area. Hudson River, here's Staten Island, Perth Amboy's down here. That's Round Valley, which sure looks like a crater. And here's the Watchung Mountains. If you look at it correctly, the way Washington did, you've got, he's in a fortress. Morristown is down there, and the blue area is watery. And we've got Amboy, New York here, Morristown showing us up here, right where Washington selected. West Point's over there. Valley Forge is over there, and you could run back and forth between them during the war. Washington chose the best spot possible. Actually, the British helped him by staying in New York. But no matter what they did, they couldn't get up there with him. And he did that. One of the reasons he did that was he, as the puppet often says, Washington was a great general. He chose people who knew the area, knew the land, knew how to make maps. I'll say Lord Stirling for one. But he also chose Robert Erskine, who's my hero, and it may show up, who drew a lot of maps of the area because he lived in the area. He lived up by Ringwood or by Erskine, New Jersey. And his detail and his accuracy is so good that you can overlay the maps, which is one of the things I like to do, and see that he got the roads right, even though they were running around with a chain and a thing you look through and measure. The accuracy is so good that where he's wrong, I found that he's right and the roads changed, which we'll get to in a minute. And this is our area here now. This is Inman Avenue. This is Raritan Road. It goes by Ash Swamp and the Votech, if everybody knows what that is. And even back then, that silly turn where the Westfield recycling area is, it was there then. And I live up here in the corner. Well, as you can see, Raritan is. I live up here at the top there. And for almost 40 years, I drove this way back and forth every day. And often as I was driving home along Inman Avenue, and I knew so much about the battle because I researched it, I'd say to myself, did I forget to get something for dinner? But this is remarkably accurate overlaid to the modern roads. And it wasn't the Short Hills, although these were the Short Hills. The battle took place at the Short Hills Tavern. I'm not going to go into a lot, but that's what was at the end of Inman Avenue. If you drive up and you hit Raritan Road, there's like a T intersection. That's where the Short Hills Tavern was. And like most really good fights, it happened at a bar. But we're not ready to do that speech. I'm going to go into, while they were preparing to fight that battle, and my wonderful wife drew these pictures, how and his people, and Major Andre, which a lot of you may have heard of.
Yeah.
They sat down there by Perth Amboy and plotted how to get to Washington, who was up on the ridge up at the Drake House in that area. And this is reasonably new information. This is in Andre's hand. And the collection didn't know about it. They said, at the time, how far is it between the different towns to get to him up there at Marston? This way, this way, this way. They were plotting out even then how to get up to Washington from Amboy. And this, if people know who Major Andres was, and he has a journal that's online. A lot of the papers didn't make it into the journal. This is one of the things that you have to go and look at the papers to find. That's one of the things I like to do. And the people who have it had no idea of the significance. But in Andre's journal, he does have a map of the area, and he shows the battle happening down at the corner and how the people came down from our fort, which they don't know what to call it. It just happens to be there to stop the battle during the Battle of the Short Hills. I'm gonna just say the British stank at maps. And I'm just going to show you, and this actually says, this is a later one, it says the action at Short Hills on it there. It shows things, their maps were terrible. Yeah, here's the one that says there was some action at Short Hills. And this is supposed to be the end of the River that goes by Oak Ridge and so on. Here's the Bound Brook, but they didn't know about our encampment. So they didn't put it on the encampment, because if they'd known, they probably wouldn't have come this way that day to do the Battle of the Short Hills. And I'm just going to go on and make fun of the British map makers, which they still call them. They had the roads so bad, poor, they didn't know what they were doing. So during the battle, they kind of marched up and said, "Oh yeah, we got to go this way." Including, as you can see on this one, from Andre, you can see he laid it. This is by Major Andre's hand. He put the dots up where they actually went rather than on the roadway. But poor mapping. It's a good thing we had Erskine to show the correct, or you can overlay it anyway, the correct maps. So using those maps in the 50s, local area people made a wonderful map, which I found in the attic of the Scotch Plains Historic Society and enhanced it. This is an enhanced version. The original is just, you can hardly even see it on the paper. And it was done by Wardlaws, the school, Detweilers, a bunch of people who really know history. Not somebody like me who just kind of hangs around it. They did a great job, and their map shows down here our Vermeule property, the encampment. They didn't know about the change in the road because they didn't have Erskine's maps properly at those times. And Erskine's maps, just like the Vermeule's, shows this curvy little bend where the encampment was. I got to put on my glasses for a second. Okay. And just to show you how wonderful Erskine's maps are, this is the area. Here's our railroad. This is the bend over by Scotch Plains, and then it comes down to Plainfield. Erskine did a series of maps, and he died in 1780. Otherwise, he would be a national hero. If he had survived, people would talk about him all the time, like they do the other people. He got a disease in the swamp and died in 1780. But he did help Washington up to then. But he laid out our area in a series of maps, which, if we look at how good they are overlaid on today's maps, it's more an error in the scanning machines that throw the lines off than it is in his measurements and his lines. And where he's a little different, and there's some spots in the Watchung Reservation, we've realigned the roads. He was right, and you can still go there and go, "Oh yeah, here's where the road went. There's a spot through the woods." He was right, and it doesn't match. including our area, the Scotch Plains. If you can see how clearly and how well he managed to do his road work. It really helped us find things. And one of the things he did was the area around the Vermeule camp. This is Front Street, now goes straight through. In those days, just like on the Vermeule map, it made a curve around the property. And if you enhance it a little bit and darken it up, you can see that the 1799 fort, which we have the dimensions for, fits in that spot where the road goes like that. Just, Drake House is up here. And here's Newmarket. Yeah, it really helps. And we have to, and I'll just color it so you can see the rest of the Vermeule property. Guess what? The fort works just there, and it's right above the river. It's a really good spot. I'm going to just talk about that location. Now, we don't have a good map of the encampment yet, although we're finding out, and Nancy's right, those are engineers. We're there at the corner going, okay, this is the corner, we think it's here. And they're going, well, actually, no, it says it's here. And I like knowing where it is exactly, but it's like at the Battle of Short Hills, Lord Sterling was shot, his horse was shot out from under him during the 1770s. He was shot on a hill 300 yards east. This is written in somebody's account of the battle. 300 yards east of two bridges. Two bridges is where the Frazee House is, two creeks, there's two bridges. There's two hills. One's there and one's right behind the Votech. They're a few hundred feet apart. And we have declared the one behind the Votech is the Horse Hobble Hill because, you know, he fell this way, he fell that way, he fell there. You don't have to be that specific. So, although I'm going to show where the fort is in a 3D little image, it could be here. It might not be here, but the guys, what is it, NJIT?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very good, but we passed the nit and we're into the picky part.
Very much.
But so Vermeule had the encampment in the early times. He then later on in 1799 sold the land. And that we have some ongoing stuff. Oh, I'm sorry, I just throw up. While we were in Princeton, everybody knows this broadside. We've all seen this. This is our 1799 encampment. If you take those letters, you take that off and look at what's underneath. This is the 11th Brigade, which was at the Vermeule property at that time. There, this is our broadside. Here's Ogden's on there someplace. Yeah, Aaron Ogden's, our Aaron Ogden, who's at the camp. This is his paperwork, and it's not really revolutionary, it's more quasi-war things.
Yeah, and we have notified
Yeah.
Congressional Library that it's misidentified. So hopefully they'll change it at some point, because it's identified as being Revolutionary War, not quasi-war.
Okay. Sarah's chained my right leg to this podium, so I'm talking to the mic. And so Nancy and I are hanging out at Princeton, you know, in the library, and I just want to point out the Ogden. There in the Princeton library is this piece of paper, and I said to Nancy, "What is this?" And she goes, "Oh, that's form." What did you say was form?
Yeah, it's a government form.
It's a government form. This is what the guys in the Army would get when they sign up for that broadside. This is the number of pieces of meat, how much sugar and corn, all of the things that you would get when you signed up to go to our encampment in the 1799 one. So there's still new history.
Yeah, and I was, since I had worked for the post office all my life, I was like amazed that they even had a government form.
Yeah.
From 1799, it looked like my PS 50 that
Right.
we have to write out when we sign.
So when you would sign up for this, they would hand you the PS50 form.
Yeah,
And you'd sign it and say, okay, I'm gonna go. And this has only been connected like by us in the last few months. Anyway, okay, so let me go on to how I made this flyover, and this is kind of an animation, but basically I spent a lot of time when I'm not in the cellar of some building, online looking at things. I'm sure there's a dot or something somewhere. I'm hoping this will play. Okay, this is what it said there. Hamilton's actually had some letters about the fort. And Ogden and Smith, who were there in 1799, actually had competing blueprints. I took Ogden's blueprint, and these were all in scale, which was very good for what they had in those days. And if you lay it out, and we know what it's made of because they listed the boards, they listed the kind of woods, they listed the Albany boards for the ceilings, which are 2 inches by 14 inches by 14 foot. Everything worked out really well for the layout of what the cabins would be that the officers would stay in. And I didn't put the white lead on, but they also bought white lead to make the cabins. And spruce something or others for those rafters. And then they had fancy Albany boards for the roof, but they had trouble getting the bricks. It took a while. The brick delivery was really delayed. Finally, it showed up. That's what those cabins looked like that they moved into in the encampment in 1799, not the earlier encampment, same spot, different time period. And I was really pleased to find that, because it showed what they looked like. And then later on in the, this is on the Library of Congress, they had a drawing of what the brigades actually looked like and a description. William Smith, who was the leader at that point of one of the brigades with Ogden of the 11th, 12th, and 13th Brigade, sent a letter saying, here's a map of what we've done. And it was an interesting map. And oddly enough, the next page, they had the interesting map again. At the time, I wondered why they duplicated the map, until finally one day I was looking at it again and I said, oh, wait a minute. It's 2 pages of the same map. And in fact, what they did was they duplicated the center, and what they made was a map of the 11th, 12th, and 13th Brigade to scale, which is really nicely done, including the field officers, staff places, the other officers, and the guys who are going to get shot on the side toward the enemy. Very, very detailed, really nice numbers. If you do anything, like if you had a little model of the huts, you could actually just kind of put them right in there and say, oh, that's where they go. And everything fits out really nice. In fact, with a thing like this, you might as well just put it on a 3D map within a few feet of where it's supposed to be and show what it would look like if you were there. Let's see if that works. Anyone who gets dizzy, just close your eyes and don't look. So there's Quibbletown. There's Brunswick Way in the background. That's Samptown. Yeah. And this was actually built. This is 3 blocks. How far is it over there? 3 blocks, 4 blocks over, down the street. This is what it looked like. And yeah, there's Amboy way off in the distance and the short hills, of course, Elizabethtown. That's what we had. And the lovely Albany boards. And I'm just going to run by just because.
many soldiers there?
Three?
Yeah.
3,000? There were 3 brigades, and a brigade is, I wish I was a historian. Anyone know how many people are in a brigade? There's an actual number that's,
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
In the Revolutionary War, it was 1 to 3,000.
yeah, I think it was 3,000. And of course, they were right below Middlebrook, who likes to take credit for everything. But that's what the fort actually looked like based on Hamilton's and Smith's drawings and information of the time. But I don't know exactly where it's going to go. I could be 10 feet off in some direction based on that. And so we're just going to put that away. Yeah. Well, actually, what I use is the digital elevation models from,
3 to 5,000.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, and that's what that looks like.